He was raised, literally feet from the port that now he's on the commission for, so he has a long interest in the shipping and marine management and of the whole area there. He's trained in fire protection, water rescue, terrorism emergencies, hazardous materials emergencies, and major disaster management. His specialization in the fire service is emergency logistics. He's worked throughout California on emergency response teams and has helped manage disasters with costs exceeding $100 million. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Hodge to the stage.
Thank you. I'm a fill-in for this panel. They asked if I would moderate when they had a space left over, and we were just saying I was kind of perfect for the last panel. Because it is what I do full-time. I'm a full-time firefighter. I work a lot of time at the fire station that's literally across the street from our office at the port. And our port's built on, it's right next to my house, and I've kind of lived and breathed this area the whole time. And after that chain, and the change is that, where logistics managers are becoming sometimes much more than that, where you're fulfilling a lot of the retail side of things too. So first I'm going to introduce Andy Garcia. I like the fact that Andy started as a Teamster in 1966. And he's been doing logistics for over 30 years now. He is the president of GSC, founder of GSC Logistics, which is a premier third-party logistics provider through the Port of Oakland, the Port of Seattle, and the Port of Tacoma, offering supply chain services and transportation, deconsolidation, transloading, and value-added programs. So, you want to come on up? Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Good morning. This is interesting. I was expecting more of a question and answer panel. As a result of that, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation available to share with you. However, my colleagues as well as myself, we're entrenched at the Port of Oakland. We're on the front lines. We're service providers working with both importers as well as exporters, serving the Northern California community and then also the Seattle-Tacoma community. Some of the unique characteristics of the Port of Oakland somewhat coincide with some of the presentations offered. The first presentation prior to our panel was piracy and terrorism. And even though there's members of the Port of Oakland here, I think the city of Oakland, certainly when Mayor Kwan first took over, engaged in what I would consider piracy of service providers. The mayor encouraged, in order to uplift her popularity, what are called Occupy Oakland marches. And what these marches did is fundamentally they shut down the port. And in doing that, the mayor disregarded the fact that the Port of Oakland is truly a major gateway for West Coast activity. The effect that the shutting down of the port, and it happened twice, it happened in November of 2011 and then in December of 2011, was that many of our customers did not have any inventories to process subsequent to the shutdown, to the Occupy Oakland movement. And in doing so, for some of our customers in the state of Nevada and Utah, this also caused a shutdown, not just of 1 day or 2 days, but at times 3 days and 4 days, based on the traffic time from the port to those destinations, as well as the work schedules that they had in line for processing the inventories that we would handle at the port. GSC Logistics does both drayage throughout the 11 western states from commodities that originate through the Port of Oakland, as well as deconsolidation. The deconsolidation program at the Port of Oakland is characterized by handling a very large volume of imports for some major retailers. On the average, we're processing about 25,000 FEUs through the Port of Oakland for 2 of our major retail customers. The process is totally manual because the variety of case sizes do not lend themselves to having any type of a mechanized facility. So we rely very heavily on the labor pool at the Port of Oakland, which is very abundant, somewhat not as skilled as we would like them to be, but certainly very much committed to exploring and exploiting opportunities to develop themselves. One of the major issues that the Port of Oakland is facing today is really the sustainability element, in the sense that through CARB's regulations to minimize emissions at the Port of Oakland, there has been a series of benchmarks on which equipment that is used for port drayage, mainly your big tractors, have to get closer and closer to being the equivalent of a 2007 engine or newer in order to be allowed in and out of the port terminals. Market pricing at the Port of Oakland has been very suppressed. And this is part of a process that began many years ago when I started in this industry, at which time transportation was totally regulated. It was controlled by very large transportation companies that were totally organized by the Teamsters. And any time a Teamster contract came up, then the trucking companies would go to the Public Utilities Commission of the state of California and increase the tariffs that everyone had to use in order to price a service. As these tariffs began to become more costly, at one point it was more expensive to ship 1,500 pounds from Oakland to San Diego involving high-tech commodities than it was to ship the same 1,500 pounds from Oakland to Chicago. That's how out of proportion California transportation costs were compared to the rest of the nation. Eventually in 1982, transportation was deregulated, and at that point, companies negotiated contracts directly with transportation and service providers. And the end result is that many of these large trucking companies that were organized and had very high wages to contend with were unable to compete in the market and eventually went out of business. Of probably 100 different companies that I was aware of back in the 60s and 70s, there's fundamentally two major transcontinental carriers that remain, and they merged several years ago and have had no end of challenges, and that is the Yellow Roadway Corporation. Since then, since 1982, the industry is characterized by independent owner-operators, small and medium-sized trucking companies, and in California, for the last 5 years, if anyone wanted to start in the trucking industry, all you needed was $50 to get a DMV permit, and then you would go out and buy whichever tractor you had the ability to maintain and to support. The end result is that the equipment that was used at the ports was deplorable. They weren't just creating emissions issue, they were spewing lava out of the smokestacks because they were old tractors. They were tractors that really should have been taken off the road years ago. The California Air Resources Board issued its emissions guidelines. We've all abided by these emissions guidelines. The Port of Oakland has been very supportive in trying to help the transportation providers at the port in an effort to make sure that there is enough supply of service providers to deal with the demand. Unfortunately, I have to say that for the first time in the last 10 years, January 1st of 2013 was a real reality check for us. The availability of independent owner-operators at the Port of Oakland has compressed because the cost of upgrading to a 2007 engine or newer tractor far exceeds the financial capabilities of many of these independent owner-operators. And as a result, we're really starting to face a compression on our ability to supply the market with the demand that is presented to us. In order to overcome this, industry has now organized, and GSC Logistics has developed what is called TAP, Truck Assistance Program. And in this program, what we're doing is we're going out to our customers, advising them that if they want to remain at the Port of Oakland, they are going to have to accept price increases for what we call a clean truck fee. In Southern California, the ports of LA and Long Beach, which are the two largest ports in the US, have had a clean truck fee since 2009, along with a container fee. The Port of Oakland never issued a container fee because Oakland is really a discretionary port, and more so is more of an export port than an import port. The result is that LA and Long Beach, between their clean truck fee and container fees, as well as The aid that was provided by the California Air Resources Board were very successful in upgrading their equipment and are still very successful in getting all the owner-operators to have 2007 tractors or newer. I have to say CARB offered the Port of Oakland really what was left in terms of aid or grants compared to what was awarded to LA and Long Beach. But again, Oakland is a much smaller port. Our efforts are currently focused on helping the independent owner-operators develop the funds to be able to upgrade their equipment so they can continue to operate as a service provider. It's a very tough market because pricing has always been very compressed, and shippers have enjoyed a very competitive market. But as the number of trucking companies continue to dwindle because they cannot meet the financial demands of having to support a much newer fleet and all the costs associated with that, more and more of these trucking companies are fading out of the market, and the result is that prices are going to increase considerably. I would not be surprised if by this time next year, pricing for services throughout Northern California, certainly originating out of the Port of Oakland, will increase somewhere between 20 to 30%, simply because there isn't the supply of drivers to meet the demand. In addition to that, many of these drivers have the option to leave port services and fundamentally offer services in over-the-road transit lanes, which CARB's regulations will not come into play until January of 2015. To also affect the ability of service providers to meet market requirements, the vessel lines have extricated themselves from providing chassis for the haulage of containers, of ocean containers, and have passed this on to ourselves, the service providers, the logistics companies. That has caused a major dilemma because many of the service providers don't have the infrastructure nor the IT infrastructure to be able to support the management, monitoring, invoicing of chassis costs. And as a result, more and more smaller trucking companies are fading out of the market, not only because they can't meet CARB's requirements, but because they cannot manage a chassis program where they can bill their customers enough to be able to pay what is expected from them from the chassis providers. I don't want to give a gloom and doom picture of the Port of Oakland because certainly there's a great deal of individuals, there's a lot of great minds that participate and work very hard every day at trying to upgrade the port, attract customers, and support the providers that are currently serving the port. But we have some challenges. However, the logistics, the warehousing, the integrated logistics industry is made up of survivors. Is a very entrepreneurial industry which opens doors for individuals who have a vision, who have a desire, who have the dedication, the ambition to start a business and to prosper through their efforts. I'm very encouraged by the new leadership at the port that is very much focused in enhancing the port's opportunities and services for customers that are seeking to use the West Coast as a major gateway, and will do everything necessary to support those efforts to make sure that Oakland continues to rank among one of the top 4 or 5 ports in the U.S., and hopefully with the growth of exports, the port will be able to increase its relevance in the U.S. industry within the economics of the country. Thank you very much.
And we've all been dealing with the clean truck requirements, and I think in Southern California, you know, we haven't been impacted as heavily. I know we recently ran legislation last year in concert with the Port of Oakland to try to get some more flexibility in the CARB requirements and the refunding from CARB on issues. We got vetoed by the governor. However, I will give CARB credit because they came through after the fact and have met with us and given us what we were looking for in the bill, which was a big surprise to almost everyone involved. So sometimes working that constant pressure, especially on the legislative side, can yield results and build a better relationship there. But you know, speaking of the trucking, I'd like to go to Bill Elmore from UB Universal, because I think maybe a little update on what you're doing in rail would be nice, since we've been discussing the trucks are the first part. Bill is the owner of UB Universal. He's been a consultant since 2008 on international logistics and distribution. He was instrumental in helping industrial railways establish a facility at the Port of Oakland for the export of forest products to Asia and the Middle East. He remains under contract with Industrial to handle marketing and business development for the Port of Oakland facility. Thanks, Bill.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be in the capital city of what I consider to be the greatest state in the nation and spend a little time talking about what we do at the Port of Oakland. I do represent industrial railways doing business as industrial transloading at the Port of Oakland. In 2008, when I first began consulting for industrial, I did a market study for them. They had at that time 6 transload sites, and we're going to talk about the word transload in a few minutes. And in the process of that market study, the results were that it indicated that the most strategic site for us in continuing growth and development, particularly if we're going to be involved in international trade, was to be in the heavy haul corridor at the Port of Oakland. In 2010, we were able to secure a very large contract for the export of lumber to Asia, which kind of supported the entire market study and gave us a step to the process of developing a transload site at the Port of Oakland. We brought that site out of the ground in March of 2011, and in the first full year of operation, we had about 10,000 TEUs of just lumber alone to the Pacific Rim. Logistics is a big word. Logistics, warehousing, restuffing. I was on the phone with my oldest son last night who was on his way home to pack a suitcase for a business trip to Minneapolis. Well, as he approached home, he noticed that all the surrounding blocks were cordoned off by SWAT teams and policemen and helicopters, etc. And the ensuing nightmare there that came out of that was that there was a gunman in the house in the sleepy little town in North County, San Diego, in Encinitas, and he couldn't get to his apartment. So he wound up going to San Diego to spend the night with a buddy, and about 2 a.m. this morning when he called in, finally got the okay to go home. Well, by the time he got home, he realized he had a 6:30 flight, so he was up all night long, and the last time I talked to him this morning, he was sitting in a plane headed to Denver, where he was going to change planes to Minneapolis. But the flight was delayed because Denver was under a snowstorm, and he was frustrated, and he said, "Pops, let me put it to you in terminology that I know you'll understand. The logistics ain't good." I'm going to take these words, distribution systems, logistics, warehousing, and restuffing, and put them into one word called transload or transloading. Now, if you go to Webster's dictionary, you're not going to find the word transload in a dictionary. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about, in essence, what transloading is. The definition of logistics comes from the 19th century word logistique, or literally to mean to lodge. Now, we all understand logistics as the management of flow of resources between the point of origin and the point of destination to fulfill needs and requirements of customers. I'll try to make this microphone stop popping. Logistics is material handling, production packaging, inventory management, warehousing, transportation, and in the theme of our last panel, security, because we as logistics companies, transloading companies, are responsible for the security of the cargo that we hold for our customers. How does transloading come to play in all of that? Well, transloading is the process of unloading from one type of vehicle and loading to another. That may be as simple as what we refer to in the industry as cross-docking, where an over-the-highway truck or rail car comes in, and we literally take it, live load it, what we call live loading, taking it off that one vehicle of transportation and loaded it into a container for distribution, and in our case, primarily to the Pacific Rim. The act of transloading involves all the processes, by definition, of logistics. Again, material handling, production, packaging, inventory management, warehousing, transportation, and security. In other words, it's the process of lodging material for a defined period of time for distribution to its final point. One might question why that's necessary. It's necessary because it is defined by the needs of a particular customer. And I'll give you just a few brief examples. The customer may need to consolidate different types of products shipping from different suppliers. And throughout the course of this brief definition, I'm going to use our lumber export program in Oakland. What happens with our lumber export program is lumber may come from, finished lumber and goods may come from several different manufacturers, typically either in the state of California or certainly from the Pacific Coast, heavily out of Oregon. That lumber has to be consolidated at one location because the demands in the Pacific Rim, in Asia, may mean that they need several different varieties or grades of finished lumber in a specific location. So that's one reason. A customer may need to consolidate. One of the advantages that we have on behalf of IRC that we have in our Port of Oakland facility is that we are in the heavy haul corridor. So that may present a need where inbound or outbound containers may need to be reduced to meet legal shipping weights for California highways. I'll give you a recent example. Last week, a flat rack of coils, steel coils, oversized, which, by the way, Ron hauled for us, came out of one of the terminals, and the weight would have exceeded the normal legal limits for transportation by an over-the-road truck in the state of California. So that flat rack, loaded with steel coils, came to our facility at the Port of Oakland, and we reduced it. We took it off the flat rack and actually put it on 2 loaded trucks, and it headed for its destination in Nevada. The same applies to export containers that can be loaded to maximum payload within the overweight corridor to maximize shipping weights for export. That becomes extremely important in an industry that is looking for every last cubic foot or every last pound in that container going international to reduce shipping costs. Another reason is a customer may require warehousing to meet shipping schedules for either an import or export program. Once again, I'll use our lumber program. As the lumber comes in, either by rail car or by truck to the Port of Oakland, and we're getting the mix right to go to Asia, we also require a USDA inspection. And so those things don't necessarily happen simultaneously, but there's an example of one need, why we need to bring it in, get it on the ground, get through the USDA inspection, and then it's ready to stuff into containers. Competitive costs for the method of final distribution. Again, lumber export, every single pound, every single cubic foot matters. Transportation obviously becomes part of cost of goods sold. The importer and exporter examines all of the shipping methods available to achieve the most cost-effective option. In the case of lumber, moving from the port, and I am going to talk a little bit about railroads, from the port, it depends upon the region where lumber is produced and shipped, whether it arrives by rail or truck. So here's an example. An inbound rail car of lumber is roughly, has the same volume that would be contained in 4 over-the-road trucks. And on the outbound side for the export, that railcar lumber is about 3.4 containers that we're loading for export. With rail, the greater the distance and weight, the more competitive advantage rail transportation provides. Now, because IRC, Industrial Railways, the parent company, founded in 1956, the heart of that company is building, engineering, designing railroad track, to put it quite simply. And so as a company at the Port of Oakland, the types of moves that we consider, either for import or export, are rail-based. That's our concentration. I don't know if Jennifer Klein's still in the room. As she is, she'll, if I misstate this, I'm sure that she'll correct me. But in terms of domestic transportation, the railroad can move a ton of freight, 500 miles on a gallon of diesel. It's highly efficient. So it's the process of providing the lowest cost of delivery in the most efficient manner to meet the needs of a specific customer. Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you can't, you're probably right. And for those of us involved in logistics, and in my definition, transload involving all of these operations where we're doing different things for specific customers, meeting definite timelines, we have to think out of the box all the time. Because IRC deals with, I don't want to suggest smaller companies, but certainly not national retailers, the specific needs, timelines, et cetera, of each individual customer are different. So we're constantly engaged in the can-do. We can.
Thank you. And our last speaker today, and then we'll go to questions, is Ron Cancilla. Am I saying it right, Ron?
Yeah, close enough.
Excellent. He's a partner at Impact Transportation. He's a co-founder of Impact Transportation. In 2005, they added transload and rail. Today, the companies are located in a 250,000 square foot facility on the Oakland Army base. They generate about 100 jobs in the area and 30,000 TEUs throughput annually. I also like the fact that on the bottom of all these bios, and I'm not reading it, they have the personal bio information. So if you want to date Ron, he unfortunately he's married. He's got 4 girls and a baby boy. He spends his off time coaching youth soccer and softball. He enjoys working on his old cars and coaching the kids. This always cracks me up. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. Unlike my fellow logisticians here, I'm not as long-winded, so I promise to get you out of here and get you to lunch as soon as possible. You know, as a logistician, as I like to call myself, just because I don't have a PhD or anything fancy like that, it just sounds a little bit more professional, if you will. I've spent my entire adult life working in and around the Port of Oakland in all aspects of freight movement. I started off working as one of the lumpers unloading containers and worked my way through the ranks till the point where I became an independent contractor. Went from 1 truck to 5 trucks to 10 trucks, and now I'm the owner and founder of Impact Transportation and Impact Transload and Rail based in the Port of Oakland. And as he said, we have about 100 folks working in and around our operation daily. We're not the biggest, but we know we're not the smallest. We do trucking. We have a full blown trucking company, from moving containers to flatbeds, vans, drop decks, double drops. We're kind of known in the port to be a little different in means of moving over-dimensional cargo. We specialize in moving the big flat racks and machinery, heavy stuff off the docks to reduce its weight or size and legalize it for transportation across the highways. Some of the projects we've been involved in, we moved 450,000-pound hydraulic hammer to the Bay Bridge project. All the cable you see that's strung across the New Bay Bridge, that all came in on flat cars through the rail. It all came through Impact Transportation. So, as well as all the light poles they're putting up now. So, when you think of, all the logistics and all the things that go on in and around these companies and in and around not only the port, but the Central Valley and up here in the Sacramento area, it's pretty intriguing, at least to me. There's a lot of aspects to it that aren't seen from the outside. It's kind of ironic that they have this panel up here. We're all friendly competitors. We all work together. When I have capacity issues, I call, on GSC's team and vice versa. We do all the drayage for industrial rail. We're also neighbors there at the Port of Oakland. So when Andy brought up the fact that, the carb issues and the things that they're going to be in the light this year, I guarantee it. You're just hearing the beginning of this. Typically, this is our slow time of year. It slows down after the holiday rush, and we're able to regroup and get ready for, the ramp up into peak. That has not happened this year. We are rolling right through it. It's Chinese New Year now. In a normal year, we'd have 10, 15 trucks sitting on a daily basis. Not this year. There's obviously some smaller companies or something that's disappeared, and it's affecting our capacity. We've been turning away work from customers that we had tried to market on multiple occasions. These are large volume opportunities that we're turning away right now as we regroup and position ourselves to go into, April, May when things start to pick back up. That will be in the light. As an independent contractor myself, it's near and dear to me. A lot of the guys that work for us and work at Impact are family. A lot of our drivers I drove alongside of for many years. To watch them go into this thing and struggle the way that they're starting to, it's disheartening. Fortunately for us, because we're into this specialized product and the over-dimensional stuff, some of our guys probably make a little bit more here and there, and we do have, we're at now 50% of 2020 compliance, but that's a rarity. We lost no trucks in January on 2013. That's a rarity. I was talking to a group of drivers yesterday about their plans. It's not. The outlook is not good. So, come 2020 or January next year, this is going to be a big problem, and it's something that we're having to address with our customers now, as Andy said. We're trying to strengthen those partnerships and let them know where we think it's going, and hopefully that then they'll be able to help compensate these guys to pay for these $80,000 to $115,000 trucks that they have to be in this 2008 or newer compliance range. So it's a scary time, especially for a young company as Impact is. We're coming up on our 8th birthday, I think it is, in April, and we're looking at some big challenges. So, in a nutshell, that's it. Like I said, thank you.
Thinking, in some ways, we're segueing into a logistics transportation committee just by function of what you guys specialize in a lot of ways. I think it is important that us in the shipping industry and us at the ports are cognizant of how we fit into that supply chain, and we at our level are able to sell kind of the sexiness of what we do. I love the comment about the four, you get 4 trucks for 1 rail car. And that's something that I can sell to my public, along also selling to potential customers. You want to make sure that we're part of the success of a product and supply chain. And you've seen some people do is actually be able to move into, especially the value added. I mean, that's where you can really find, in the longer term, some of the gravy to the products. And if you find that there's some place in the logistics chain where you can change that product, move that product, you know, repackage it for your customers in that logistics chain. And if we, from the port side, can help make those connections sometimes with our customers, especially our smaller ones, I think we'll all be more successful. Do we have any questions today? Got one hand up.
Hi, my name is Zach. I'm from the California Maritime Academy. How do you see the shortage of qualified truckers affecting California's capacity in the next 5 to 10 years, especially in the port areas?
We have to divide California fundamentally in two major markets. One is the ports of LA and Long Beach, which are, again, the largest ports in the U.S. And then you have the Port of Oakland, you have the Port of San Diego, you have the Port of Sacramento, you got the Port of Stockton. LA and Long Beach, because of on the one hand, the population that they support, namely Southern California, which is about over 2/3 of the entire population of the state of California, as well as the industrial complex that they have been able to resolve their transportation issues by way of meeting all of the California Air Resources Board's emissions guidelines and benchmarks. However, the Port of Oakland has remained as a discretionary port for importers, and also the Port of Oakland is growing more and more as an export port. The implication is that in order for a port to support an export industry, you have to have the empty containers onto which you're going to load your export products to ship them overseas. If the Port of Oakland doesn't have enough imports to support the export demand, it's going to create an issue for itself and the exporters throughout Northern California, because there won't be enough empty containers, ocean containers, to load the exports that are available to ship overseas. That's one element. The other element is that as a result of the regulations and the fact that Oakland has been a discretionary port, the market has not allowed for price increases to support the cost of these new units that have to be purchased in order to be CARB compliant. So the forecast is we have to figure out, if CARB is not going to be a participant in supporting independent owner-operators and small trucking companies in upgrading their equipment, then industry has to assume that responsibility. GSC Logistics is a member of the CRT, the Coalition for Responsible Transportation, and it is a group of transportation providers involving Southern California, Northern California, and other national companies, as well as major retailers. And we've gone back to our customers and say, look, we have to implement a clean truck fee. We have to have a way that we can support the owner-operators to buy these tractors and to be sustainable, because these individuals need to earn a living. They need to bring some money home after they've made the payment of their rig. The forecast that I can offer is that industry will always react. We will always find alternatives and initiatives that will allow us to meet the demand for services that are presented to us. But the only alternative, given that CARB at the Port of Oakland has never provided the funds necessary for us to be able to retrofit and upgrade our independent owner-operators, is going to require a major price increase on the services. So the forecast is there's going to be a deficit of service providers, and the only way that we're going to overcome that is by increasing prices that will hopefully attract drivers who are currently performing services out in the valley area, because the remuneration for working out of the port is better than what they can get providing services out in the valley. And through price increases, we'll be able to attract more drivers to support the demands of both the import customers as well as the export customers. Again, we don't want to give a gloom and doom. We're very distressed with exactly what Ron Cancilla mentioned, that whereas at this time of the year we should be somewhat slow, we should have an excess capacity available, and what we're finding is that we're turning away business. The short-term issue is many of the smaller customers who are looking for transportation providers through the Port of Oakland, companies that are only going to be importing 1 or 2 or 3 containers a month, are going to have a major challenge finding a service provider that will be interested in handling that volume, because I can deploy my fleet to serve a customer that may have 300 or 400 containers a month. And obviously, that's where I'm going to assign my drivers to. So there's going to be, there are going to be some service issues. There's going to be a definite price adjustment that can be anywhere from 20 to 30% higher than what is being charged today. But I have every confidence in the world that industry always has the ability to react, because our decisions are intelligent, are rational, are logical, and we're not held back by political obstructions.
Hey, Zach, I would go a step further on that now. I don't know any kids that are growing up saying, oh, I'm going to be a truck driver. They're just not out there right now, so I'm a little worried about that. I'm definitely worried about it, but in our industry, unfortunately, we're like a moving target. You know, we have time to address the issue at hand now. I do see that as being a big issue in the very near future. Because, like I said, we don't see people wanting these jobs anymore. Part of that is because of the price structure, and hopefully that starts bringing them down and gets them encouraged to do so, but it's definitely a concern.
My name's Todd Lacoste. I'm with Caltrans, Office of System and Freight Planning. We did a tour last year. We did a goods movement seminar at the Port of Oakland, and we did a tour, and one of the gentlemen of the port was saying that if the Port of Oakland were to become a port of first call, that would drastically improve the port's business activities. Is that the kind of thing that would allow you to have better pricing and better opportunities for truckers and your businesses in general?
The first port of call is a very critical element, certainly for importers more so than for exporters. We have a major customer, the second largest retailer in the United States, and we serve this customer through what is called LOS, level of service. And fundamentally what it states is that we have 6 calendar days from the time that a container arrives at the Port of Oakland, not based on the actual time of arrival of the vessel, but the estimated, the ETA, estimated time of arrival. We have 6 calendar days to retrieve that container, process it through our deconsolidation center, and ship it throughout 35 different destinations in the U.S. where this retailer has both distribution centers as well as import warehouses. Oakland has a major deficit of first port of calls. There's only one vessel line today that serves Oakland as a first port of call, and that's APL. And they've already announced that they're vacating their terminal at the port, the EMP, Eagle Marine Terminal, turning it over to SSA, and there's questions as to whether they're going to support a first port of call into 2013 and beyond. That has a major implication on importers because inventory cycles and supply chains have continually shrunk. For some of our customers, removing 1 day of supply chain requirement from their inventory flow program represents $5 million of savings to their inventory carrying cost. At Oakland, having no first port of calls, and now with the advent of vessel lines combining their customers into different vessels, where Evergreen assigns their containers to Oakland to Costco, and then Costco adds 4 days of additional transit time to arriving to Oakland, it absolutely creates a massive issue for importers who will not support an additional 4 days of ocean transit time because every day costs them an additional $5 million of inventory carrying cost. So Oakland has this major challenge that because they don't have the volumes compared to LA and Long Beach, nor compared to Seattle-Tacoma. They're always a second port of call. And between the slow up that has been part of the reaction and the response of vessel lines to try to save cost on escalating fuel costs, where they slow the vessels to where the transit time is longer, as well as vessel lines sharing vessels instead of going directly from origin to destination, this continued to add day to the transit times, and the end result is that Oakland is continuing to lose a relevance as an import gateway due to this extended transit time, and certainly the reason for it is we have no first port of call. Now, the Port of Oakland has tried to give incentives, as much as $1 million incentive to a vessel line that will add Oakland as a first port of call. But because the import volumes have continued to shrink, they've turned down that incentive and are not taking advantage of it. So for import distribution, Oakland is becoming a lesser port compared to LA, Long Beach, Seattle, Tacoma, and that will have a direct impact on the import volumes coming in, which will affect the availability of empty container boxes for the export volumes that Oakland is trying to continue to grow.
Take one more question.
I'm going to throw a few out there. First and foremost, not too many before lunch, but what's the average life expectancy on a truck tractor trailer unit? And second, do you perceive, specifically to Oakland and the CARB requirement, do you perceive the advent of the M580 shipping program with Port of Stockton and West Sac as a stress reliever for those independent trucking companies, and or the future development plans, future development plans for the Oakland Army base?
Well,
as it relates to rail, their increased rail access for that yard.
I'll address the life expectancy. Up to the point of the DPF filter, we had been getting as many as 1 million miles before an end frame, which means basically you drop the cylinders out and rebuild the engine on these trucks. And I know 1 million miles sounds like a lot, but I mean, these are guys that are logging 500-600 miles a day if they're running solo and not teams. The teams are putting on 1,000 miles a day, so, you know, or more in other states. But the life expectancy now with the DPF filters is questionable. We're having problems even with the newer trucks where, well, we've had DPFs catch on fire. We've had constant problems with them because now there's 15 more sensors and, you know, all these little things that can shut the truck down. So we're not sure what the life expectancy of these trucks is at this point in time.
Also, the maintenance and insurance costs, obviously, for newer rigs is much higher, which again puts further pressure on uplifting pricing for services, and that adds to the complexity. If what you were referring to was supporting barge programs into Stockton and Sacramento, you know, we've discussed with some of the barge providers the possibility of setting up empty yards near their locations so that we can reduce the amount of transit that is required between the barge location in Stockton and Sacramento to the actual exporters of agricultural or wines or nuts or whichever the product may be. However, at this point, I don't know whether it's feasible, based on the current price structure, to pay for barge services compared to what has been assessed for over-the-road services. Barge services adds days to the supply chain. It's a longer process than taking a container out of the Port of Oakland, delivering to Lathrop, and returning the empty. So there is this dilemma of the cost structure on the one hand, as well as the addition of days in transit to complete either an import container being brought through a barge into Stockton and Sacramento, or an export container being shipped through Stockton and Sacramento.
And on the redevelopment, I believe that you know, part of the ultimate goal with that redevelopment of the Oakland Army base is to entice the steamship lines to bring in more first port of calls. So that would alleviate some of the problems that we talked about earlier. One part of the redevelopment that the port is working on now is the expansion of the intermodal yard for all the discretionary freight that doesn't, necessarily come into Northern California, but gets transported from the ports to the trains and then into Chicago, St. Louis, and so on and so forth. But we hope the redevelopment's going to go forward, and we hope that it's going to, help us bring in a first port of call.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you to the whole panel for coming. We're getting ready for lunch. Everyone, please.